TV. There you go. The recording's in progress. For those of you joining via our live streams on GetSetup TV, Facebook, or YouTube, you are also welcome to enter questions into the comments, and we are going to do our very best to address everyone's questions. So now on to our special guest. Victor has led senior leader roles at Intuit, Kodak, Microsoft, now at Evite. And Evite, I was actually surprised to learn that it started, I believe, in 1998, over 20 years ago. It was one of the early .com companies. Victor joined as CEO in 2014, and since then has redirected the brand into a customer-obsessed company focused on bringing people together. He's taken the company into exciting new ventures, including text message invitations, donations for nonprofits, and most recently, in response to the pandemic, virtual parties with video chat. Victor has a long history of reinventing online consumer products and businesses across a wide range of industries, including community, financial services, photo sharing, expertise networks, and more. And if we get time, maybe he'll tell us what it's like to be an honorary knight, which he was named in 2019 by the House of Savoy for the social good and the philanthropic work that he has done with Evite donations, his love of Italy, and the impact that he has made as a leader in the tech world. So Victor, welcome to GetSetup.
Such a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Molly. And I always read those sound bites. I'm like, these sound very marketing-y, but when you read them, it sounds really good. I'm like,
Thank you. Great. Well, let's start. Victor, I have some questions for you, but
sure.
Of course, it's meant to be a conversation. So we heard a bit about you from that bio, but tell us a little more. What brought you to your current role as CEO of Evite?
So I had a CEO role right before this, running a brand called Photo. You might have known it as Kodak Gallery. And I took a year off from that after we sold the business to Shutterfly. And at roughly around the year mark, I decided, okay, I kind of had my sabbatical. Let's get back into the market. And I've got a great recruiting friend who actually, I think they've landed me in my last 2 or 3 roles, or 3 or 4 roles now. And so they brought a bunch of different opportunities out. Some were more interesting than others, but this one really floated to the top for me. One, because of course I'd used Evite forever and knew the ubiquity of the brand and the strength of the brand. But 2, what really excited me then and what still excites me now is in a weird, bizarre way, I'm kind of getting soured on technology, which is crazy because you know me really well, and I'm like always bringing like the latest gadget and VR, and so I'm like this huge technologist. But at my core, because I've got 2 young girls, I am seeing some of the really negative downsides of technology and technology overuse in terms of abuse of social media and devices, all of the things that, if you guys are parents or spend time with young kids, that's probably maybe the #1 issue. So it was really rare for me to see this brand Evite. I'm like, well, what's the core of this brand? I was like, if it succeeds, it brings more people together face to face, right? It bucks the trend of technology. And so that purpose is so compelling from my perspective. Like our goal is not to build the world's biggest invitation service, which we kind of are already, and just to send out more invitations for the sake of that, right? Our core purpose is to build these face-to-face connections. And so that still keeps me there. This is the longest job I've had, actually. At this point, I'm usually, okay, what's the next thing? This is the first time I've actually been in a role where I can look forward and say, I could run this business forever, because that purpose is so powerful.
Yeah, no, that really resonates with me, and I think others here from GetSetup. We have a similar kind of goal. It's not technology for technology's purpose. It's to help people, to bring people together, to, in our case, build skills and create community. So
yeah,
I think
love
that's
that.
why we were excited about this. That's great. Well, so you joined in 2014, you have a good run for 6 years, reinventing the business, customer obsessed, and then something called COVID happens. What has it meant to run a company focused on gathering people during a pandemic when, in-person gatherings have certainly been discouraged and unsafe in many cases? And just wondering, what were those conversations like at Evite when the pandemic first started?
Yeah, so yeah, one of my core jobs as CEO is to look out further than anyone else and think about the risks that might impact the business that other people aren't thinking about. And I want to say back in October even, or maybe early November, when the news started to hit about China and the early rumblings of the virus, that really tricked my radar. And I was thinking, okay, not that I'm like a doomsayer and I track, pandemics, but there was a part of me which is like, one of the biggest existential threats to humanity is a renegade pandemic. There's a great movie called Contagion, which actually was one of the first movies my wife and I watched when the pandemic hit again. But long story short, it is something, it's a real thing. It is a huge concern. Bill Gates, who ran Microsoft, right? It's one of the things he's most passionate about is how do you prevent this? But I saw those signals and I said, okay, this has the potential, right? If it continues down this arc, right, to become a worldwide pandemic, at which case we're kind of hosed as a business and we need to figure out our attack plan. So the good news is we've been thinking about it well before it really hit the shores and started to dampen activity. So we had put some preliminary plans in place. It was actually fairly easy for us to move into that. I will say there were many conversations, I think, with my team where I'd bring this up, maybe like in the December, January timeframe. And I think they looked at me like, I think you're crazy. Like, you don't need to worry about this. But then when it all hit, well, we were all living that, reality. So
Yeah.
no, in terms of running the business, that's the worst possible thing that could happen to something like Evite is to have a global pandemic come across that shuts everybody inside. And so immediately we saw our events, or I'll use the term events or parties synonymously, but it's really the activity in the system, the number of parties thrown that we touch, that fell overnight by 80+% when the pandemic first hit. So immediately the business had to figure out, okay, what's our relevance in this new world? How do we survive as a business? Because in terms of our business model, everything comes from that flow of events, right? Everything flows from those parties. And just what role do we play? We had great marketing discussions. I'm like, no, of course we're not going to tell people to go throw a party when there's a pandemic, but what can we tell them? Because we can reach 40, 50 million of them via email. And so at that point in time, we pivoted the company very hard into embracing virtual events and supporting that, and also launching a slew of products that could help people stay connected while not in person. So we enhanced things like we have a card product, a digital card, which we enhanced with video, and then we made that all free. It's actually still free today. So you can send a really beautiful premium video card to somebody for free. Most companies will charge for that, for instance.
Yeah. Wow. What of that do you think will continue on?
It's funny, virtual parties at some point in the early pandemic were 50% of the events that were flowing through the system. But in the recent time frame, the last 3 to 4 months, they've really started to taper down. So right now they're sub 5%. I do think there will be a group of people that still use the virtual to get together. I'll give you one example, a personal example. So during the pandemic, maybe one of the best things I did to stay connected is I reconvened a bunch of my college friends. We get together every 2 weeks. We have a standing virtual kind of party meeting, and we get together. So that's something we actually never did before COVID, but it's something we'll continue moving forward.
Yeah.
Another example would be like virtual birthday parties. My family scattered across multiple states. We were always super lame in terms of celebrating that, but during COVID, of course, we got together and did little virtual mini supplement celebrations, basically. So things like that, I think, will persist. But we're banking on a big inflow of people back into the real world.
Right. Great. So what do you predict, or I guess, so, we're starting to come out. I think people are getting really excited to get together. Any predictions? I mean, it sounds like, you had really good foresight into what was happening before the pandemic, before many people realized what was happening. What do you predict might happen in the next couple of months? I mean, it sounds like you're already starting to see changes happen. What are some of those changes? I mean, is it different than, are the events you're seeing now different than pre-pandemic? How are people getting together now?
Yeah, no, it's great because we have, I think actually maybe one of the best current data sources at what people are doing.
Yeah.
Because we can actually see real time, like, are people throwing more parties? What type? I think before any other, really before any other company. So there's some interesting trends. During the pandemic, there were, as a stereotype, there were actually large chunks of the country, depending on political leaning, that were less suppressed. So states like Florida and Texas, as an example, right? Actually, they were still suppressed, but not anywhere near California or New York, right? So you actually had variation across the country in terms of the political leaning of the state, which makes sense given the media, right? The media messages that were going out in the different environments. Everybody at this point is, of course, lifting. Different categories are lifting, I'd say maybe ways that you would expect. So outdoor gatherings, right? Those would come back fast. Things that are coming back slower are anything attached to people that are not yet vaccinated. So kids' birthday parties is one of our slower categories because, of course, that cohort just recently got the ability to get vaccinated over 12, but sub 12 is still, if you're a parent with kids under 12 and you were really concerned about COVID, you're not throwing a big indoor party in the way that you used to, right? Maybe you're doing something outdoors, but you're still suppressed from that perspective. So overall, I think we're going to see this bubbling of activity back, varying by state, varying by category. And then the big open question from my perspective is, do we actually inflect the other way? And people have talked about this roaring 20s moment for the society. And, I think you need to parse that in a lot of different ways because there's trillions of dollars of stimulus that came into the world that's going to create a whole bunch of activity. But, for me, narrowly around Evite, I think about, is there actually going to be a social backlash is the wrong term because it sounds negative, basically a social positive wave, because people have realized in the last year and a half, oh my God, human connection is so valuable. Like, are people going to throw off way more parties? We aren't seeing that yet. We're not seeing any major category where parties are like jumping far past where they were in 2019, which is kind of our benchmark, right? We have to go before COVID. But there's hints of it, like Valentine's Day, actually back in February, actually was bigger this year than it was in 2019. So that was like a small signal of like, maybe there's something there. So we watch that very closely. Every day, every week, we look at the distribution and see if there's a signal. Nope, you're still muted, Molly.
Sorry, and that's very interesting. I think, will there be kind of a flux here, a spike at the beginning, and then we'll kind of revert to the normal?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great. Well, I know many in our community, we're already, talking about how to get back in person in-person gatherings. But a lot of us are nervous about it. What kinds of tips do you have for getting back to in-person gatherings in a safe and appropriate way? Is Evite making any adjustments to support for kind of this post-pandemic environment?
The second part first, maybe because that's easier. So yeah, we're doing tactical things. So we'll have things like vaccination party templates that we'll throw out there. But in terms of embedding deep actual product function around COVID, at this point, we're opting not to do that. At least today. Again, it might change. But we've actually built over the years, since I've been there, a pretty sophisticated communication and tracking system just within the invitation system. So if you wanted to like ding all your guests with a message and say, hey, like, are you all vaccinated? Like, there's a built-in messaging and chat system. So there's all of those things are in there that kind of do the communication that you need. Right. So yeah, from a feature perspective, probably not a ton. In terms of getting back together safely, that's a great question. I think the biggest challenge comes when you have these mixed environments. So I think we see clearly a group of people that are saying, yeah, we're going to throw a party and you have to be vaccinated if you come. And that, of course, simplifies the world significantly, because in that environment, depending on which state you're in and how aggressively they're following the CDC guidelines, you can almost have a normal party right at that point in time. So that's one, is I would say, if you're going to throw a party, just be super clear. If you want to have fully vaccinated, of course, it really simplifies your world. If that's not the case and you do have a mixed party, then you have the complexity of guests who are vaccinated might still be uncomfortable with those who are not vaccinated, and do you make them wear a mask? That's something that we're seeing. Mixed party is like, hey, if you come, you're vaccinated. If you are not vaccinated, please wear a mask at the party. Right. So just clarity of communication at the highest level is probably a big one. And then the second thing I can think of is, this is more from the host mindset, is you're throwing the party. Again, I'd say as a stereotype, if you're the one throwing the party, you're probably reasonably comfortable with a social gathering because you're the one throwing the party. So you're probably on the most extreme end of comfort. And again, depending on who you invite to the party, the key thing to remember is there are people that are going to be way behind you in terms of their comfort level, and just being attuned to that and thinking about that in terms of the communication, the environment that you're setting up. Because somebody might still say yes to the party and show up, but might be like where you were a month ago, right, in terms of your comfort level, say. And if anything, for those of you that have gone through that, a vaccination curve through, like your mindset and fear changes pretty radically on pretty short order. So even someone, even a couple of weeks behind you, right, in terms of, say, vaccination, can be in a very different mental state.
Right. Are you hearing, are your learners, are your party goers on Evite, do they share stories about how they're coming out of the pandemic, or what they're worried about? Any input from your customers?
Generally we keep the system private. So, your party is your party, no matter how radical that is. But literally just in the last 30 days or so, we started to ask our customers for photos, party examples. And so that flow has started to come in, and we're actually sending that back out to the community, almost as inspiration, to say, like, here's just people getting together and enjoying the magic of face-to-face. We've gotten some great photos and some great stories along those lines.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and I'll look forward to when we open up the Q&A here pretty soon, just what questions our audience has about getting back together. And, whether you're worried, not worried, you're ready to go out and party, whether, you're taking it slowly and carefully. I think you're right. Everybody's on a different place on the spectrum.
Yeah.
And I think that's right about, just really understanding and being attuned, like you said, to where people are at. That's great. Well, I'd love to talk a little bit about the philanthropic goals and activities of Evite, just to shift a little bit. And then during the Q&A, I think we'll get back to the focus on coming out of the pandemic. But, our community we have lots of people doing volunteer work and philanthropy, and it's a big focus. And I know that at Evite, you're all about better together. And obviously that means bringing people physically together. But I wondered if you could also talk about, your philanthropic goals, where that fits within your company and your mission, and how that translates into your product, and how, what you're doing to help the community support each other.
Yeah, no, it's great. So at the very meta level, you're right. I feel great about just the business itself, because again, as we do great stuff, it actually does good for the world. But no, very, very specifically around philanthropy, that all got kicked off in that year that I took off between roles. I actually did a bunch of exploration in the nonprofit and fundraising space, because I had a personal passion there, and actually even kicked off some side projects. And what I learned from that whole thing was, oh my God, if you are a nonprofit, it is so hard to raise money, and you are spending half of your time raising money, and you're not doing the work that you want to do, because so much of it is just keeping the engine alive. And it really bothered me on a deep level that there were all these online tools to fundraise, but they all took, at that point in time, 7 or 8% of the funds that were raised just to fund the platform. So in the back of my head, that always really bothered me. I thought, look, there should be an open source, right, crowdfunding ability for nonprofits to raise money, because kind of defeats the purpose, right? If they're raising money, they've got to give a huge chunk away. So that was in the back of my head as I joined Evite. And when I kind of plopped in, I think it was maybe after the first year, we saw clear signals that people were using Evite to raise money for nonprofits, and they were hacking it together. So you would see somebody would send out a party and they'd say, hey, I'd love to raise funds for this cause, and here's my PayPal, like, please send me the money. And then like, I don't know what I'm going to do about the receipt. Like, don't bother me. We'll figure it all out. And so it was very clear. It's like, if we could just embed with one click the ability to donate, I thought, right, well, one, we'll make a better customer experience, but two, we'll also do some good for the world. And my only core requirement for doing that was I didn't want to take any cut of those funds. So at the time we went out and we looked for a partner, and we found one, a great company called Pledge. But then it was called PledgeLink, now it's called Pledge. And they power this donation function for us. And super simple. We basically have plugged it in. There's millions of, pretty much every nonprofit in the planet is in their database and screened and vetted. And so as you're going through from a product perspective, maybe you're throwing a retirement party, and you said, hey, instead of a bunch of presents, we would love to raise money for the Alzheimer's Association or something, a nonprofit that we care about. You can literally do that with 2 clicks, and it'll show up in Evite, and people can donate. It does all of the complex management for you. So everyone will get their receipt. Again, we don't take a cut of that money, and it's generally just all positive. It's been probably 5 years, maybe a little bit more in market, and we've raised through that what we call Evite donations, over $22 million for various causes. And I had my team pull some examples. Alzheimer's Association, one example, raised over 100,000, 200,000 for the American Cancer Society, like 100,000 for leukemia. And so they're not huge donations. It's just a ton of people throwing parties, raising, right, small, $1,000 here, $500 there, but it all adds up.
Right. What a great way to crowdsource that, get everybody involved. I think that's really powerful. Well, great. A couple more things. So one thing I want to share with everyone on here. So we actually at GetSetup have launched a new class to learn how to use Evite to put together safe gatherings. So that's going to premiere actually tomorrow. So we're really excited about that. We'll share the link with you later. So if you want to join that,
and if you have any feedback on that product experience, you can send it to me directly, and I'll send it over to our product team. That's my email.
Yes, they're very responsive. I remember when you were working on the embedded video during the early pandemic days. I was sending you a lot of.
No, you've always had the best feedback, Paul.
It wasn't great at first, but you guys worked it out and really made it work super well. But before, even before people get to the class tomorrow, we'd love to hear from you. Do you have tips for how to use Evite? Are there insider tips and tricks? What are your favorite features on the site?
That's great. So let's see, maybe I'll slice it into a couple different buckets. So things that people probably don't know about or might not know about. So one I mentioned, kind of these free premium cards with video embedded. It's a key growing part of our business, but there's a ton of energy there. But not, people always think about us as just invitations, but we have this great card product. So that would be one. I'd say the second one is if you haven't thrown a party in, fairly recent time frame, we've really enhanced the overall mobile experience around Evite. So people have always thought of us as an email-based invitation system, and that's completely different now, over the last couple of years. So it's completely embedded, with our app, it's completely embedded with your phone book. You can send SMS invitations out just via text if you don't have someone's email. We have a whole messaging system that I mentioned, right, where you can actually communicate with that closed group, because you might not have the contact information of all those people, right, real time. So you can actually do that. So just the mobile, bringing it current state and beyond, has been significantly up leveled, I'd say. Sort of insider tips. Maybe my favorite one there is people may or may not know this, but you can have multiple accounts all associated with your Evite. So, right, it's in a what's called a merge account function, but you can go back and enter your work, your personal, multiple work addresses, and it all consolidates it into one account. And that's of course super important because you might get invited to a work party and a personal party, or over the course of your life, you have all these parties, and there's a magic moment when you actually bring all that stuff together, because then you instantly see in one place all of the amazing parties that you've gone to. It's like one of people's favorite things to do.
Yeah, I do love going back through my account and seeing all the events, over time. Although during the pandemic, that was, well, it was giving me hope for the future. That's awesome. All right, well, great. So one last question, then we'll open it up. So you must have seen all kinds of parties over the years on Evite. Any fun stories or best of parties that come to mind, whether, through the years or even during the pandemic, things that you were surprised about?
God, there's so many. People love to party. Well, maybe a recent one. As I mentioned, we are going out to our user base and trying to say, hey, give us some inspirational moments. And one came from this woman named Miss Kerwood from Texas, and her son Adam. This was the first time they had gotten together. It was for his graduation. There was a photo, of Adam holding these two babies, like in either arm. They're not his kids, I don't think, but they're the grandchildren of the grandparents, and the grandparents were the ones that submitted this to us. And they basically said, you know what, we haven't seen our grandson. We got to see this graduation. We haven't seen these. I think they were maybe 6 and 4 months old at the time, but they hadn't seen them, right, because of COVID. And there was just such, the description that she wrote just had so much joy. And this photo of the graduate holding the two babies that she sent was just wonderful. So that's just a great example of what we lost over COVID, right? And then the joy on the flip side of it coming back.
Right. Great. I know you also mentioned, for our older adult audience, some of the events that you've seen through the years, or again, even during the pandemic, some interesting stories of types of events people are throwing or starting to throw.
Yeah, no, we're seeing there was a weird spike. We were just talking about this before the call of there's kind of a farewell and retirement party wave that we're seeing. Started maybe in like January, February, but a disproportionate growth in those parties relative to the other events that are all flowing back. So we're not quite sure, exactly what's causing that, but it's interesting for sure. It could be that people waited maybe waited for COVID to pass before they started kind of celebrating those retirement moments together.
Yeah, great. Well, good. Well, let's open it up to questions. If you have questions here if you're on the Zoom call here, feel free to put them into the chat, or even, we're a relatively small group. So, feel free to either raise your hand or just unmute and ask your question. We're a friendly group here. If you are on any of our live streams and watching live, feel free to enter your questions into the chat, and we will get those over to Victor so that we can talk about that. One question already came in that as people think about their questions, I can, Carol Sue, I think, and Carol, you're still on. So if you want to add to this, you are welcome to, but I know she had commented that many people are nervous about, holding parties, and even if you want to restrict to people who've been vaccinated, and make sure everybody stays safe. How do you know people are vaccinated? They're probably, you're probably not going to ask to see everybody, your guests' vaccination cards. Carol Sue, anything to add to that, or we'll get Victor's thoughts?
I just wanted to take in that, and also I wanted to know if this is a concern of other people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We we thought about that internally, like, are there ways you could kind of verify it? Would you plug into a database? But at the end of the day, I think where I land is that the majority, and I've always run all my businesses with this philosophy, and I think it's generally treated me well, and just life in general. I feel the majority of people in the world are actually high integrity, honest folks. And so my general perspective is, if you as the host made it clear, hey, this is really important, right? We want you to be vaccinated. And if you're coming, you're basically verifying that you're vaccinated. Like, the percentage of people that are going to breach that trust are very, very, very low in general. And so you could definitely ask for cards, right? Ask for proof. On the flip side, I don't think anybody would be upset if you as a host said, hey, we're going to vaccinated only, and we'd like you to just show your vaccine card at the door just to be sure. Like, no, I don't think anyone's going to take offense at that. Given that we went through a once in a century pandemic. So no, it's absolutely a legitimate concern, for sure.
Yeah,
I'm sure a lot of people are feeling that. I'm sure a lot of people are thinking that.
Like you said before, Victor, it's really about the communication, just being really clear about, what the intentions are and the expectations. And I think most people would abide by those.
And generally, again, it depends on the event, but you're probably inviting your friends, so that even ups the trust factor significantly higher.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point, Victor. I think there's a very big difference between, an event with your close friends and family versus a larger event. Are you starting to see, or thoughts on like where we start versus and how we expand beyond our comfort zone?
No, that's interesting. Well, just data anecdote. Yeah, we definitely saw parties got way smaller for a period of time, and they're slowly creeping back. So of course, that from a social dynamic and social graph perspective is definitely a trend. But no, in terms of going to larger and larger parties, it's really going to be on such a case-by-case basis, right? And I think depending on the person's comfort level. So I know people that have gotten vaccinated and they are completely comfortable going to a large indoor gathering of mixed vaccinated and unvaccinated folks, right? That wouldn't bother them at all. And then I know other folks that have gotten vaccinated and they would even be a little concerned to go into an indoor space with a bunch of vaccinated people, right? Even though the CDC has said that's okay. So it's really just down to that individual's, I think, psychology and kind of either the slow or fast comfort that you'll get kind of working out of the last year and a half.
Yeah, we had another question come in. So for the people on the side of the spectrum, who want to maintain the virtual, who still either, because of comfort levels or like you were saying before, have found this new way of connecting virtually with people who otherwise you don't have an opportunity to connect with. So just wondering for that group to have virtual gatherings, what were or are the trends in having successful virtual parties? Any tips from, your team who, are now experts probably in virtual gatherings? Any tips from them about, how to do that successfully?
Yeah, God, no, there's a gazillion, and we published some articles, and there's a ton online that have been published on how to throw kind of a fun virtual party. I think my overall comment would be, no, you can absolutely interject activities into that experience to give it an extra party boost and make it seem more fun. So I think a hard thing to do is to simply get a bunch of people here and say, like, have a drink, and then just say, like, we're gonna party. That kind of basically just a bunch of people drinking, talking to each other, which is still fine. It's a great conversation. But as one example, we had a company party just recently, and we played a virtual Family Feud game. It was so fun, and that was actually moderated by a third-party company. But it was just a great example of we turned it into a virtual party with a competition, and people absolutely loved it. I think they might have been skeptical going in, but even I was a tiny bit skeptical. But then we did it, and I was like, oh, that really was fun. So kind of blending activities of some kind with the event, I think, would be my top comment for virtual.
Yeah, we've done trivia events. We did a Name That Tune
Yeah.
party with my family, and that was a lot of fun. Good. Okay, well, let me just check here. So another area, I was actually really curious about this myself. What does it mean in reality to be an honorary knight? Was there a sword involved?
There was not a sword involved. There was a very large, I have a very large piece of parchment, I guess. It's a kind of a formal document. So what does it mean? It's actually quite fascinating. So the Italian royal family was basically put into exile after World War II, but they, as an entity, for lack of a better term, had been conferring knighthoods right through the Italian empire for thousands of years, and they maintained the ability to confer knighthoods as a royal family. And so they've continued this trend of and finding folks. I really think kind of their core decision criteria are, yeah, are these people doing some good? Are they doing some good in the world? Are they doing knightly things in the world? And do they have at their core a love of Italy? And from my perspective, the work we did with Evite donations, I think hit their radar. And yeah, Italy's my favorite country. My wife and I travel there all the time. Cecilia, of course, you guys are great friends. So no, on a practical basis, not a ton, but it is a lifelong responsibility. So there's a group of people that we're connected. We go fundraising for different causes. In a normal year, there'll be multiple events where we'll actually convene. We're called Cavaliers and Dames, male versus female, which is pretty cool. And it's just a lot of really smart, high integrity people thinking about how to do good in the world.
That's great. Well, I know the world can use that, so thank you for doing that. That's great. Okay, does anybody, I don't have any more questions in the chat, but if anybody wants to talk about any of these topics or ask a question, you're welcome to unmute yourself and jump in. Otherwise, you can also enter it into the chat.
I ask a question. So what are you seeing in terms of size of the events? Are you seeing more large events now or still very small?
They're not, there's always been a distribution because we're such a large site.
So it's all over?
Yeah, kind of across the board, but the average event size definitely came down a bit during COVID. Two things. They got a little bit smaller, and then for a chunk they either went virtual or outdoors. Right, were two big ones. But then even on the outdoors one was, that's an interesting one where sometimes it would go the other way. So there were something like 3 million people invited to parade parties, which took over. I don't know if you guys ever saw it. People literally, instead of birthday parties, you couldn't do that anymore. So people got into these huge, potentially 30 cars long, so those parties sometimes got bigger because they went outdoors. So it's, it's fascinating, mix depending on the category.
Wow. That's pretty cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael.
Okay, well, if you have more questions, think about them, but I do want to, since we're nearing the end of our time together, one thing I want to make sure we do before we finish up is take a group photo of Victor with our attendees. So if you're willing to be in our group photo, this would be the time you turn your camera on, if it's not already on. And I will ask our photographer to jump in and help us take a photo. Oh, and there's our photographer. Thank you, Natalie. All right. Anyone else? Last chance to get your picture out there. All right. Thank you for that. All right. Well, I am so excited to start gathering and start
Yes,
using these
yes.
tips that you talked about. I think it's, you know, this is a new, it's, I realize, you know, myself, others, you know, there's a certain hesitation. I mean, obviously we're, like I said, we're excited to get out there, but there's a certain hesitation about what can we do and is it safe, and you know, how do we get started? So I think all of this was really helpful for thinking about that. And if you want help in planning your party and getting the word out and communicating, like Victor said, you know, he's not, you know, nobody's paying anybody here to talk about Evite, but I do think it's a great tool. And we do have the class, like I said, that is premiering tomorrow. So if you want to brush up, if you've used Evite in the past, it's changed quite a bit. And like Victor said, lots of new features, or if you've never used it, it's a great way to communicate and get the word out about your party. So we will have in the chat a link to that class. The other thing, I know Evite actually, in working with their team to set this up, they have a lot of party ideas and a lot of learning about, you know, more learning about how to be safe and gather here in the post-pandemic world. So you can go to their site, Evite, www.evite.com. At the bottom of their site is a e-newsletter that you can sign up for so that you can continue to get these kinds of ideas. And one more exciting treat that we have for all those joining today here in Zoom and on our live stream is that Evite has been kind enough to share a special code to get a free Evite premium invite. So it's good for one small event using their premium service, which is great. And it's available to the first 1,000 people. So, you know, make sure you, if you want to use it, get out there and use it. The code is actually GetSetup, all capitals. Just GetSetup when you go to the site. If you want to sign up for that premium invite, you can put that code in. Good. Let's see if we had anything else. All right, so I want to thank everybody here in our audience and on our live streams. If you would like a recording of this event, please email our support team at help@getsetup.io. If you're new to GetSetup, we hope you've gotten a taste for what we do. We have over 400 online classes weekly, all designed for older adults, taught by older adults. The classes are all kept free through the work that we do with local governments, community and Medicare organizations who support their members with free classes. And I just want to draw your attention to some relevant classes. There's the Evite one that we've talked about tomorrow. Tomorrow, and I think that's, I actually don't know what time that is. That's 9:30 p.m., but not in my time zone. I think somebody will probably chime in on the chat about what time that is at. Okay, and remember, everyone who registered, like with all of our classes here, you're going to get an email after the event with follow-up links and notes, the things we talked about here, some relevant classes, and some other exciting guest speakers that are coming up. Victor, thank you very much. This was really a pleasure to talk to you and start to talk about getting together.
No, it's my pleasure. And thanks to all of you for joining and spending some time. We'd love your feedback, and Molly for stellar moderation and fireside chat was so fun.
Well, like I said, our community can give me feedback as well, because we're all lifelong learners here. Great. Well, looking forward to seeing all of you in a future class. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy your days and enjoy hopefully some gatherings coming up soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Victor.
Be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.